They thought she was just a visitor, an outsider who had wandered where only warriors tread. 12 operators laughed as she approached the firing line, certain she was out of place. But in one impossible moment, Elena Ghost Navarro pulled the trigger and shattered a 10-year record with a single shot at 1,200 meters. The laughter died instantly because the woman they mocked was no tourist. She was a counter-sniper built for battle. When the mission alarm screamed, she proved it again, eliminating 8 enemy sharpshooters from a moving helicopter. And then, as if breaking one legend wasn't enough, she reached farther, 1,500 meters, rewriting history. This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. Heat rolls off the concrete like a living thing, the kind that makes distant targets waver and look farther than they are. Flags along the lane snap and sag in irregular breaths. Brass shell casings glitter in the sun from the morning's firing. Tiny medals given by a range that respects no one. Voices carry, short and confident, the sound of men who know this ground better than their own living rooms. The Naval Base San Diego firing line is a bright white band in the noonday glare, fenced by rules and ritual and a board that lists one number everyone knows by heart, 1,200 meters, 10 years unbroken. She walks in alone. Elena Ghost Navarro doesn't look like a record breaker. Slate gray t-shirt, faded jeans, a small pack slung over one shoulder. Hair pulled back without effort, no unit insignia, no swagger. Her sneakers whisper on concrete. She pauses at the red safety stripe and takes in the picture, the range. Is painting, wind socks mounted low and high, mirage boiling above. The berm, the angle of the sun off the benches, the way sound bounces off the cinder block wall and comes back a half-second late. She doesn't glance at the board with all the names. She doesn't need to. Are we running a public tour now? The voice rides in on a laugh that's just a little too loud. A young SEAL with a fresh haircut and the confident posture of a man who's never been proven wrong steps away from his bench. Ma'am, this isn't a yoga studio. Wrong building, wrong day. A few heads turn, grins widen. Those who don't look at her keep working bolts and studying dope charts because they've already decided what this is, a diversion, a story for later. Master Chief Ryan Steele Patterson doesn't grin. He walks up slow, a man built from 2 decades of sand and sea and hard truth. His shadow falls across her shoes. This area is restricted, Patterson says. Voice, even. The kind that can carry through rotorwash. Qualified personnel only. You can observe behind the safety line. I can read wind from here, Elena answers, as if she's agreeing to the rule. Her eyes move, not her head, following a thread of shimmer between 2 wind flags. You've got a left-to-right push in the last third. It'll lie to you at the mirage. The young SEAL laughs again, louder this time to make sure everyone hears it. She can read mirage, Chief. We should recruit her for the gift shop. One of the older operators, Tyler Viper Coleman, looks up from a notebook. Not laughing, not frowning. Just memorizing. Across 2 benches, Petty Officer Marcus Kane locks in the big rifle that has weighed down a lifetime. Of photographs, the Barrett resting on a precision cradle, bipod legs bit into concrete. David Thunder Brooks is checking a Kestrel, lips moving while he runs numbers against temperature and barometric pressure and the clockwork of what they've done 1,000 times. Patterson remains a post planted in the heat. Behind the line, he says again, no sharper, but closer to final. Elena doesn't argue. She steps back, obedient by inches, and stops where the red paint splits into a hairline crack. From there, she watches the pre-game ritual unfold, bolts slid forward with surgical care, magazines checked, barrels shaded, spotters settling behind glass like priests at an altar. She studies with an attention that isn't curiosity, it's inventory, flag position, ground shimmer, minor inconsistencies in the concrete slope between benches 5 and 6. The way Kane's shoulder settles a half-inch left when he exhales. All of it goes somewhere behind her eyes. Kane is first. He lies down behind the 50 like a man who's been photographed here, his cheek weld molded by years. "Shooter ready," he calls. The range officer echoes. The scope's reticle steadies. The lane holds its breath. The rifle speaks, not a crack so much as a short, angry thunder. Air slaps chests along the line. Through the spotting scope, a tiny puff in the dust throws a clue. Not there. Close, but not there. Low 4, left 2, the spotter calls, precise and public. Kane grimaces only with the eyes. "Wind shift," he says, and no one disputes it. Brooks is next. He absorbs the correction, kisses the trigger, and sends his answer. The dust bloom blooms somewhere else. "High and right by 6, the spotter says. Coleman follows. His impact walks inward like a man who knows which door to choose. "High 3, windage dead on," the voice behind glass announces, a hint of pleasure sneaking into the syllables. Benches cycle. Bolts work. Brass rolls to a stop. 12 operators take their turns the way they always do. The slow waltz of breathing, hold, pressure, follow through. Their misses are not failures, they're work product, fine-tuned and teachable. The range listens politely to each new attempt and shrugs. Elena tracks each shot like a meteorologist reading a storm edge. She doesn't watch where the bullet lands. She watches where it wanted to go and why it was denied. The wind socks tell a different story. At the knee of the valley, Mirage is honest about the low ground, deceitful above the last berm. The sun is punching glare into glass from bench 7 at a different angle than bench 3. And the concrete bench itself, just a breath of a roll where the stock rides, adds. A quarter-inch of change no one wants to admit matters at that distance. She sees it stack up and write the same near miss again and again in different handwriting. "Still our day," someone says behind a grin. Record stands because conditions are never perfect. "Don't need perfect," Coleman answers without looking away from his scope. "Need aligned." Patterson checks his watch, then the board, then the sky. He's not gloating, he's cataloguing reasons, ready to spin teaching out of tradition. Reset. "Call your shots before you send," he says, his voice a broom sweeping the lane clean. The tension is sport good, not combat tight. It will harden later, but for now it's bragging rights and ribbing and the old story. Everyone knows by heart the day the wind agreed with a man for one long second. Elena steps forward again, stopping exactly at the stripe. "Chief," she says, tone professional, volume respectful, "I'd like to try one." Every vowel on the lane pauses. Kane lifts his head. Brooks smiles without kindness. The young SEAL laughs for all of them. "One what? A selfie?" Patterson doesn't look away from her. He does the math any responsible leader does in 10,000 quiet choices. Liability, optics, safety, precedent, time. He shakes his head. "This isn't a demonstration booth," he says. "Weapons on this line require certification and a safety brief you don't have." Elena nods as if she agrees, as if the talk is finished. "Understood," she says. "For the record, I'm not here for souvenirs." Thunder Brooks leans an elbow on his bench, amused. "Ma'am, that rifle eats shoulders for breakfast." Most guys think they're ready until they aren't. She looks at the Barrett, not with longing, but with the professional recognition of a carpenter noticing a well-used hammer. "It's a tool," she says quietly. "It does what you tell it to, if you tell it right." The young SEAL steps toward her, hand lifted in that practiced, not quite touch you use to shepherd tourists. "Come on," he says, back behind the line. He stops when she steps to the end of bench 6, not touching anything, not crossing a rule. Her hand finds the edge of concrete and settles there, fingers reading the micro-tilt the way a violinist reads a string. The gesture is too precise to be coincidence. Coleman notices. Kane notices. Patterson notices most of all. "Let her watch," Coleman says, still not smiling. "Nobody's bleeding." Patterson studies Elena for a long moment, the way a man studies a sea state before a night insertion. There's curiosity now, thin as wire but present. "Name," he says. "Elena Navarro," she answers. "You from around here, Navarro?" The young SEAL asks, kept at a distance now by nothing more than the look Patterson gives him. "Just visiting," she says. The next round of attempts begins under a different sky that still looks the same. The same wind, the same shimmer, the same uncooperative board. Kane's follow-up walks inward and stalls. Brooks's correction overcorrects. Someone jokes about sacrificing a goat. Someone else mutters about buying the wind a drink. The 10-year mark breathes easy. Elena closes her eyes for 3 beats. It's not prayer. It's a reset, a mental eraser passing across a crowded whiteboard until only the variables that matter remain. When she opens them, the picture is clean enough to carry. The last flag is lying. The mirage near the ground is honest. The bench tilt wants to nudge the stock high right under recoil, and the sun angle puts glare on certain glass, not on others. None of this is mystical. It's arithmetic with a pulse. She speaks without theater, to Patterson, not to the crowd. "Chief, you're seeing the wind at the near third and the mid, but the far third is a different animal. It's carving right across the cut where the valley pinches. If I hold for that and correct for the bench tilt, I can send one clean." "You can send one clean," the young SEAL repeats, the words polished with disbelief. At 1200, Elena doesn't look at him. "You asked my name," she says to Patterson. "You didn't ask my experience." "That's because it doesn't matter here without the paperwork," Patterson replies. Then, after a beat that isn't long but feels like it, he adds, "And because experience is cheap talk on a range where we write everything down." "Let me write something down," she says. "It's not bravado." It lands as a professional request offered without heat. If she were trying to beat them, it would be obvious. She's not. She's trying to solve the math on the wall. Coleman clicks a cap back onto a small pen and tucks it behind his ear, a concession of interest. "One shot," he says to Patterson, almost to himself. "We're not on a clock." Patterson considers the wall of consequences again. Safety, ego, example. Then he takes 2 steps closer to Elena until his voice won't carry to the benches. Up close, he finds calm in her eyes that isn't arrogance. A quiet he recognizes from people who've done difficult things with no audience. He lowers his voice anyway. "If I let you touch that weapon, you follow every rule I say. You don't lift the bolt until I say. You don't put a finger near the trigger until I say. I call stop, you freeze. Clear?" "Clear," she says. "Certificate Ranger qualified," she answers. "Counter sniper, 75th. That lands. The air changes, small at first, then everywhere. It doesn't make any of the men less skilled. It just rewrites the story they thought they were in." Patterson glances at the Barrett on bench 6. Kane steps back without being asked, like a man who's just realized the seat he wanted was reserved for someone else. Brooks watches with the simple hunger of a professional who loves to learn. Coleman folds his arms, attention narrowing to a point. "Navarro," Patterson says, voice returning to the volume of a range command. "You'll mount on 6. You'll call your holds before you send. You'll wait for my word to fire. Understand?" "Yes, Chief." The young SEAL mutters something that sounds like, "This I gotta see." But he's quieter now, partly because the look on Patterson's face says the performance is over, and partly because the range itself feels different, like the ground decided to stop telling jokes. Elena moves with the efficiency of someone who has put hands on this platform in too many time zones. She doesn't touch the rifle first. She touches the bench again and confirms the tilt with the same fingers, then slides them to the bipod feet and checks their bite. Only then does she pick up the Barrett. Not with bravado, but with the respect you give to a heavy friend you've carried too far. She pivots it on the cradle, opens the bolt, and shows clear without waiting to be asked. Because stress lives in old habits, and old habits live in muscle. Patterson says nothing. He would have asked for all of that. She offers it anyway. The stock nests into her shoulder. Cheek meets comb. The rifle and the shooter become a single line pointed at a dot that is more idea than object. Her breath goes on a metronome. The lane behind her quiets itself without being told, not out of courtesy but out of gravity. Crows on the far fence stop arguing. The heat shimmer looks less like a taunt and more like a curtain she can see through. "Call it," Patterson says from above and behind her, the position of a man who can kill the shot if he needs to. 2 mils high for bench roll, Elena replies, voice steady. 3/4 mil right for the far third crosswind. 1/2 mil left correction for the near third lying flag. Clean break, no follow-through yank. Confirm spot. The spotter has already moved to glass without being told to. "Glass on," he says, and then send when ready. "Finger straight," Patterson warns automatically. "Finger straight," she echoes. There is a fine kind of silence that only rangers know, the kind that hangs. Between a shooter calling her hold and the first pressure on a trigger, it's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of attention. It tightens the air and sets every nerve on the line like a cable under tension. A bead of sweat slips from Kane's temple and leaves a darker dot on the bench pad. Brooks realizes he's been holding his breath and lets some of it out without sound. Coleman's jaw sets not in defense, but in anticipation. The young SEAL leans forward despite himself. Patterson watches everything, her elbow angle, the stillness of her rifle's muzzle, the way her shoulders don't creep when she starts to prep the trigger. He's ready to say stop if anything smells wrong. It doesn't. "Navarro," he says, and there's no challenge left in it, only command. "On my word." She doesn't nod, she doesn't need to. Her eye is the only thing that moves. The smallest refocus in a scope that has been drinking light since sunrise. "Stand by," Patterson says, and the range holds itself absolutely still. "Send." The command had barely left Patterson's lips when the Barrett thundered, a sound that hit every chest like a physical shove. The recoil rolled through Elena's shoulder and was absorbed without strain, her frame steady, her posture unmoved. At the far end of the range, where heat shimmered and mirage had made fools of better men, the target erupted in a violent bloom of dust and splinters. For an instant no one breathed, then the spotter's voice, normally clipped and professional, cracked with disbelief. "Impact, center mass. Confirmed strike at 1200. The range froze in suspended animation. Kane, still kneeling at his bench, felt his stomach drop as if he'd misjudged the ground under him. Brooks's mouth parted in stunned silence, and even Coleman, who rarely displayed emotion, lowered his pen and stared. The young SEAL who had mocked her earlier blinked rapidly, as though trying to decide whether he had seen what he thought he had. Patterson's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. A decade-old achievement, spoken of with reverence, had just been met by someone they had dismissed as an intruder. He didn't speak right away, because words would sound small next to the sound they had all just heard. Elena eased the bolt open, checked the chamber, and set the rifle down. With the kind of deliberate care one gives a trusted instrument, her breathing never broke rhythm. She looked at Patterson, not gloating, not seeking applause, but waiting. The silence shattered with murmurs. No way. She just first round. It spread down the line like a ripple, disbelief turning into reluctant admiration. Kane finally spoke, voice low. That wasn't luck. Brooks exhaled sharply. Luck doesn't call the wind like that. Coleman leaned back, arms crossed. Gentlemen, we just witnessed a shot most of us will never duplicate. The young SEAL, cheeks flushed, muttered something unintelligible and stepped away, unable to meet her gaze. Patterson walked to the bench, each step deliberate, the authority in his posture undiminished. He studied her a long moment, then said in a tone edged with both respect and curiosity, Navarro, what exactly are you trained for? Elena lifted her pack from the ground, dusting off the strap. Counter-sniper operations, 75th Ranger Regiment. The words landed with the weight of steel. A heavy pause followed, the kind where men who had spent their lives among warriors measured the truth behind them. Coleman was the first to nod, as if the final piece of a puzzle had clicked. Brooks's eyes widened with fresh understanding. Kane's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of humility and acknowledgement. But before anyone could ask the obvious questions, a klaxon ripped through the air. The range's atmosphere, pride, shock, and curiosity, was obliterated by the shrill call of emergency. Red strobes flared across the walls, a base-wide alert. Patterson snapped into command mode instantly, his earlier astonishment locked away. "Cease fire! Secure all weapons!" His voice cut through the siren. Operators dropped into practiced efficiency. Bolts cleared, magazines ejected, rifles checked safe. Boots hammered across the concrete as Commander Sarah Hayes appeared, her stride clipped, expression grim. "All SEAL personnel, immediate deployment," she barked, voice rising above the alarm. 12 American relief workers taken in hostile territory. Mission briefing in 5. The laughter and casual bravado from earlier were gone. Operators stiffened, eyes sharpened, every movement sharpened by urgency. The record board, the mocking smiles, the jokes, all forgotten. Elena shouldered her pack, her tone steady amidst the storm. "Commander Hayes," she called, stepping forward. "Lieutenant Navarro, 75th Rangers. I've been assigned to your team for this operation." Hayes checked the secure tablet strapped to her forearm, eyes narrowing as she confirmed. "That's correct. You're attached as counter-sniper specialist." Her gaze flicked from the record board to the woman who had just rewritten it, then back to her operators. "You'll all want her with you where we're going." Kane swallowed hard, realization dawning. Brooks shifted his stance, measuring the weight of what this meant. Even Patterson, battle-hardened and skeptical by nature, found himself reassessing every word he had spoken earlier. The sirens continued to wail, bouncing off steel and concrete, but the range no longer felt like a proving ground. It felt like staging for something far greater. Hayes motioned sharply. "Move, gear up, we deploy in under an hour." The SEAL operators began clearing benches, packing kits, stowing rifles into cases with rapid precision. Jokes had been replaced by clipped confirmations and the rustle of webbing being fastened. The smell of oil and powder gave way to the heavier scent of preparation. Elena followed them toward the armory, her steps measured, her mind already shifting to calculations she knew she would need. She wasn't here to impress them anymore. She was here because the next fight depended on her making the kind of shot she had just proven possible. As she moved through the hangar, the younger SEAL who had mocked her earlier fell in beside her, still flushed but quieter now. That wasn't just range trickery, he admitted, almost to himself. You called it like you'd lived there. Elena didn't answer. She simply adjusted the strap on her pack and kept walking. In the ready room, operators pulled body armor from racks, helmets clattering onto benches, weapons checked with mechanical speed. Patterson moved among them, issuing rapid orders, his voice crisp, yet his eyes flicked toward Elena more than once, each glance carrying the unspoken acknowledgement that things had shifted. She opened her pack and drew out her own gear, each piece marked with subtle wear signs of long use in places where records weren't written on boards but in survival reports. She inspected her custom optics with the same quiet care she had shown. On the range, wiping down lenses, confirming every dial's resistance. As the team gathered around the mission board, Hayes outlined the crisis with brutal efficiency: American hostages. In a fortified mountain compound, enemy defenses layered with Overwatch positions, snipers covering every approach. Any assault without neutralizing those nests first would be suicide. The operators leaned in, tension tight across their shoulders. Patterson asked the question aloud. "How many shooters?" "8, confirmed," Hayes replied. "Ranges unknown, elevated positions, sophisticated crossfire." A murmur rolled through the room. 8 snipers in elevated terrain was a nightmare even for the best trained assault force. Elena set down her optics, her voice calm but carrying. "They're expecting a frontal push. They won't expect their eyes cut out before they can blink." Heads turned toward her. Brooks frowned, skeptical but listening. Kane tilted his head, curiosity overtaking doubt. Hayes gave a single nod. "You'll get your chance, Lieutenant. You neutralize those nests, we walk in and walk out alive." Elena adjusted the sling on her rifle case, the words simple but final. "Then I'll clear the way." The room held the weight of what had been spoken. Outside, the rotors of waiting helicopters began to spool, their vibrations seeping into the floor like the pulse of an approaching storm. For the SEALs, this was no longer about a shooting contest. The woman they had mocked less than an hour ago was about to decide whether they lived through the night. And for Elena Navarro, the record she had equaled was already fading into irrelevance. What mattered now was whether she could do it again, only this time with men shooting back. Engines roared to life across the tarmac, their growl vibrating through steel hangar doors as if the whole base was preparing to leap forward. The ready room's overhead lights buzzed, casting sharp angles on faces suddenly stripped of any trace of humor. The easy swagger that had filled the range earlier was gone. In its place was the stillness of men who understood that one wrong calculation could mean a folded flag. Commander Hayes paced in front of the wall map, her finger cutting through terrain lines that formed jagged ridges and shadowed valleys. "The compound is here," she said, tapping the valley floor with enough force to echo on the plywood. "Multiple entry points, but each is covered. Intelligence shows interlocking fields of fire. Our mission is recovery of hostages. We cannot fail." The SEALs leaned in, eyes locked on every contour. Brooks asked about exfil routes. Kane wanted to know about air support. Patterson's questions were sharper. supply lines, fallback options, what kind of munitions the enemy was stockpiling. Each answer carried with it the weight of risk, the kind of arithmetic where lives were the numbers. Through it all, Elena stood slightly apart, not aloof, but deliberate, studying the overlay from a perspective different than the others. She wasn't looking at assault vectors or breach points. She tracked elevation marks, wind channels, natural rock faces that could turn into blinds for shooters waiting above. 8 marksmen confirmed? She asked finally. Hayes nodded. 8 lightly reinforced positions? Expect concealment, camouflage nets dug in hides. They're disciplined. Then they'll be confident, Elena murmured, tracing a finger along a ridgeline. Confidence makes them predictable. Their mistake will be believing altitude equals invulnerability. The operators exchanged looks, measuring her words. There was no boasting in her tone, only analysis sharpened by years in places where a wrong angle meant never coming home. Patterson cut in, his gravel voice steady. Navarro, you say you'll clear them. That's 8 shooters in terrain we don't control. How? She met his eyes without hesitation. The same way I just read your Wind and Mirage. Terrain tells its own story. I'll listen faster than they can adjust. When you move in, those ridges will already be silent. The room absorbed that. Some faces skeptical, others reassessing. Kane crossed his arms, not out of defiance, but out of the dawning realization that the mission they thought was near suicidal might have a path. Hayes slapped the map once more. We launch in 20. Navarro rides lead bird. I want her eyes on those ridges before we're even over target. Gear check, then wheels up. The room exploded into action. Armor snapped into place, magazines clattered into vests, hydration tubes slung over shoulders, radios squawked with final checks. Boots pounded down the corridor toward the waiting helos, the tempo of deployment erasing the casual voices that had filled the range only an hour before. Out on the flight line, the Black Hawks hunched with blades turning, their shadows chasing themselves across the asphalt. Hot air whipped in violent circles, lifting grit that stung exposed skin. Crew chiefs signaled as operators jogged in crouched lines, their silhouettes dwarfed by the machines waiting to swallow them. Elena moved among them, no longer an outsider. She carried her rifle case as if it were an extension of herself, sliding into the lead helicopter with quiet confidence. Patterson followed close behind, taking a seat opposite her, his expression still controlled but now edged with curiosity rather than dismissal. The moment the bird lifted, sound swallowed everything. The thump of rotors, the tremble of metal under stress, the constant vibration that made even calm hands jitter. Inside the cabin, red light bathed their faces, casting every line into harsh relief. Hayes's voice came over the intercom, crisp and unwavering. Primary objective, safe recovery of all 12 captives. Secondary, eliminate hostile command. Navarro, you have sniper Overwatch. Neutralize enemy eyes before we breach. Elena acknowledged with a nod, securing her headset. She unsnapped her rifle case, unveiling the weapon that had just humbled a generation of shooters. She ran her palm along its body, not as a gesture of pride, but as confirmation that nothing had shifted. Each click of a dial, each press of a latch was ritual, the way others might recite prayers. Across from her, Kane watched, still unsettled by how naturally she handled what most considered unyielding steel. Brooks caught his glance, then muttered low enough to barely carry over the engine. Noise. If she shoots like that under rotor wash, we're walking out clean. Or we're flying into a miracle, Kane replied, half in awe, half in doubt. Elena tuned them out. Through her night optics, she began scanning, even before they reached altitude, studying the contours of distant terrain. Valleys funneled air currents like rivers. Ridges broke them like rocks. Her mind mapped invisible arrows of force, where wind would press, where it would falter, how a shot would bend in the thin air of elevation. Patterson leaned closer, voice pitched to cut through the rotor's pounding. "You've done this from a moving platform before?" Her answer was a simple truth. "Yes." And I hit what I needed. He held her gaze a moment longer, then gave a single nod, the kind soldiers give when words aren't enough. The pilot's voice cut into their headsets. 40 minutes to ingress. Crossing into hostile airspace. Red lights dimmed, plunging the cabin into shadow broken only by instrument glow. The operators checked weapons with silent efficiency, bolts sliding forward with the confidence of muscle memory. In the midst of them all, Elena remained focused on the ridgeline growing clearer in her scope. Hayes spoke once more, her tone final. "Everyone remember, those people down there are unarmed aid workers. We do not leave without them. Navarro clears the Overwatch, the rest of you breach and extract. If we're compromised, we adjust on the fly. We do not fail." A chorus of affirmatives crackled through the comms. As the helicopter pressed on, the last traces of the range felt like another lifetime. Gone were the laughs, the smirks, the disbelief. Ahead lay jagged stone, concealed barrels, and a valley that had swallowed intruders before. Elena centered her scope on a ridge that would be their first obstacle. Her voice, quiet but certain, carried across the channel. "When we land, they won't see you. They'll be blind before your boots touch dirt." And for the first time since the alarm had sounded, Patterson allowed himself to believe that what had seemed impossible might actually be within reach. The Blackhawks pressed through hostile skies, blades carving at thin air, while the operators inside settled into a silence born of focus. Nobody wasted words now. They checked straps, tightened plates, and rehearsed movements in their heads. The briefing had ended, but the real calculations were only beginning. Commander Hayes leaned over the map secured to her lap, marking approach vectors with a grease pencil. Enemy shooters are dug into these ridges. "Navarro, which positions will you address first?" Elena studied the contour lines, then lifted her eyes toward the looming horizon. Through the cabin window, the outline of the mountain range sharpened with every passing mile. She didn't hesitate. The northern spur, their highest vantage. Once it's quiet, the valley floor opens. After that, I'll collapse the flank. Patterson listened, weighing every word. His instincts told him to question, to probe for weakness, yet something in her certainty anchored him. He'd seen men bluff before, masking doubt with confidence. This wasn't that. She spoke as someone who had already rehearsed the fight in her mind. Kane broke the tension with a muttered question. "You're sure you'll even see them from up here? Concealment's going to be tight." Elena adjusted the dial on her optics, the glass catching a faint gleam from instrument light. Concealment only works if the shooter blends with the terrain. They'll break their own cover the moment they scan for us. "I'll be waiting." Her tone wasn't arrogance. It was matter of fact, as though gravity itself would bend to those calculations. Brooks, seated beside the gunner's door, cracked his knuckles. "We breach only if you keep them busy. If you slip, we're walking into an ambush." Hayes cut in sharply. "Enough. Navarro understands what's at stake." She looked to Elena once more. "This is your lane. Deliver, and everyone goes home." The weight of the commander's trust hung heavy, but Elena accepted it without flinch. She simply nodded and continued setting up her rifle for aerial fire. She slid a sandsock beneath the stock to steady it against vibration, checked the recoil pad, then rechecked the reticle. Even inside the shaking bird, her hands worked with surgeon's precision. The pilot's voice intruded over the intercom. 10 minutes out. Valley dead ahead. The rotor's thump deepened as the helicopters dipped lower, hugging terrain to avoid radar. The operators braced as crosswinds tugged at the fuselage. Patterson glanced at Elena. She remained calm, eye fixed to the glass, tracking the ridges that now stood like jagged teeth on the horizon. 5 minutes, the pilot warned. The red glow inside the cabin felt sharper now, cutting shadows across stern faces. Kane rested his palms on his knees, breathing in measured rhythm. Brooks rolled his shoulders, loosening tension. Coleman murmured a quick check into his comms. Elena's breathing never broke cadence. She shifted slightly, lining her body parallel with the rifle, and spoke softly into the channel. "I'll call each shot. Once the ridges are clear, you move." Hayes answered immediately. "Copy that. We'll hit the compound the moment you confirm." Patterson leaned in, his voice pitched for her alone. "Navarro, I've led teams through enough valleys to know what waits down there. If you can do what you claim, you're not just clearing space, you're saving my men. Don't miss." Elena turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "Chief, I didn't come here to miss." The helicopter shuddered as it crested the last ridge. The valley spilled open beneath them, moonlight silvering the rocky slopes. Figures could be made out now. Tiny specks on outcrops, hunched silhouettes behind scopes, enemy eyes scanning for shapes in the sky. The pilot called, 2 minutes to engagement zone. Elena lowered her cheek to the comb, centered the first target in her scope, and exhaled. The rifle was steady despite the turbulence, her body absorbing every vibration. "Shooter 1, North Spur," she whispered into the comms. "I have him." The range had gone quiet once before, when she shattered a record on familiar ground. Now it was about to fall silent again. But this time, over a battlefield where the cost of failure was counted in lives. The barrel steadied, her breathing leveled, and with the squeeze of a finger the Barrett cracked like a hammer of thunder. The first hostile collapsed before he ever knew he'd been marked. Elena called it flat over the comms, "North Spur down. Shift east." Before the echo of her report faded, she had already rotated, adjusting the reticle to a figure dug into a stone outcrop. A second shot broke, and the next threat vanished. The helicopter rattled in the crosswinds, but her posture absorbed every tremor. To the operators watching, it looked impossible. Precision carved through chaos. Hayes's voice came quick, clipped, confirmed. "Too blind. Keep rolling." The valley ahead was a web of dangers, every crest a potential muzzle. Elena tracked a glint near a brush-covered ledge. Third position, moving. She fired. Dust burst, and a body slumped sideways. In the cabin, Kane muttered something between disbelief and awe. Brooks simply watched, jaw tight, his skepticism eroding with every impact. The fourth shot came almost without pause. Elena had anticipated the repositioning of another hostile who had been crawling toward a flank. She cut him down mid-shift, the bullet erasing his chance to settle. By now, Patterson's arms were folded, but not in dismissal. He was measuring. What he was seeing, imprinting every detail into memory. "Rear exit covered," Elena reported calmly, sending her fifth round into the sniper hidden near the compound's back gate. The rhythm of her work was clinical: locate, adjust, exhale, release. Every sequence shaved seconds from the enemy's reaction time. "6 is neutralized," she added moments later, after a round snapped through a rock slit where a coordinator had been giving signals. The helicopter jolted harder as it shifted altitude, but Elena adapted. Tucking tighter against the rifle, her face set in complete focus. She dialed for distance, then squeezed off her seventh shot. Far across the valley, the most dangerous gunman, positioned to oversee the entire basin, toppled out of sight. The last target remained, nearly hidden by shadow on the ridgeline. Elena tracked the slight shimmer of his optics. Her breathing slowed, the roar of rotors dimming in her awareness. She squeezed, and the final sniper fell, rifle sliding uselessly down the slope. "8 clear," she said into the headset. "Path is open." The cabin erupted, not with cheers but with stunned silence broken by Hayes's sharp command. "All birds, assault vector green. Navarro has the eyes. Move now!" The pilot's dove, helicopters tilting toward the valley floor. Operators braced, checking weapons, preparing to hit dirt with the certainty that no crosshairs remained trained on them. Patterson leaned forward, speaking low so only she could hear. "What you just did? I've never seen it!" "You've changed this fight before it even started." Elena lifted her cheek from the stock, her face unreadable. "That's the point, Chief. You don't fight fair when lives are in the balance." Outside, the valley rushed up to meet them. The ridges that had threatened to cut them down now lay silent, stripped of their guardians. For the SEALs, the mission no longer felt like suicide. It felt possible. And that shift, born from 8 trigger pulls, would decide everything that came next. The helicopters dropped fast into the valley, blades thrashing the air into violent spirals. With the high ground silenced, the insertion could finally unfold without the invisible noose of crossfire tightening around them. Dust and grit whipped across the landing zone as wheels touched down, and the operators poured out in disciplined waves. Patterson led the push, his voice hard in the comms. "Stack left! Clear the outer wall!" Kane and Brooks flanked wide, rifles snapping into ready position as they advanced through swirling haze. Elena stayed aboard the lead bird, barrel steady across her knees. Though the ridges were cleared, she wasn't done. Through her optics, she scanned every rise, every corner of the compound. Confidence was dangerous. She would not allow surprise. Her finger rested straight, but her gaze hunted for movement beyond the obvious. Hayes signaled her team forward. Breachers planted charges at the side gate, the muffled thump blowing hinges wide. Operators surged through the breach, cutting angles with the efficiency of long rehearsal. Inside the walls, hostile fighters scrambled, some firing wildly from windows, others sprinting toward cover. Elena picked one leaning from a second-story opening and ended him before he could find his sight picture. Another tried to reposition toward the courtyard. She dropped him mid-stride. Her voice over comms remained flat, window east secure. Courtyard hostile down. Patterson's team reached the central building. Shouts echoed as doors splintered, boots pounding on stone floors. Cries of terrified captives bled into the chaos, a reminder of why they had come. Brooks confirmed, hostages located, 12 alive. Securing! Gunfire rippled as resistance stiffened. A small group of defenders tried to push through the compound's rear exit, weapons raised in desperation. Elena caught them funneling into the open and stitched the lead man into the dirt, breaking their momentum. The rest scattered, easy prey for Kane's team sweeping in from the side. The compound began to collapse under coordinated pressure. Every move the defenders attempted was smothered before it could build momentum. With each target neutralized, Elena's calm directions guided the assault. North Tower clear. Rear approach safe. Roof secure. Her oversight turned confusion into certainty. Inside the main structure, Patterson cut restraints from frightened aid workers. Faces streaked with dirt looked up in disbelief as armed operators shielded them. "You're safe," he told them, his voice firm, almost fatherly. "We're taking you home." Hayes gave the extraction order, birds inbound. Prep for lift. As the operators hustled the civilians out in controlled groups, Elena maintained her post, rifle-trained, on the valley rim, refusing to believe the fight was over until every shadow proved harmless. Only when the last of the hostages was loaded aboard did she finally ease her cheek from the scope. The helicopters clawed skyward again, heavy now with rescued lives. From her seat, Elena glanced around at the operators who had mocked her only hours before. Their eyes told a different story now, unspoken gratitude mixed with a respect so sharp it felt like confession. Patterson broke the silence first, leaning across the cabin. "Lieutenant Navarro, what you just gave us wasn't backup. It was survival." She answered without flourish. "You brought them out. That's what matters." The valley shrank beneath them, growing small in the distance. For the hostages huddled under blankets, and for the operators reloading mags out of habit, the mission was finished. But for Elena, it had only proven one thing, that the shot on the range was never about records. It was preparation for the night when precision meant lives delivered back to their families. And in the eyes of every man on that helicopter, the quiet visitor had become something else entirely, the guardian who had made the impossible possible. The flight home felt longer than the inbound push, not because of distance, but because of the weight of what had just unfolded. The rotors beat steadily against the night sky, their rhythm matching the pulse in every chest aboard. The rescued aid workers sat clustered under thermal blankets, shock still painted across their expressions. Between them, SEAL operators maintained protective perimeters, eyes scanning, weapons slung but never abandoned. Elena sat near the door, her rifle still across her lap, optics capped, barrel cooling in silence. She hadn't closed her eyes once since the first shot. Patterson sat across from her, studying her the way a man might examine a weapon he'd thought he understood but now realized had hidden mechanisms. He didn't speak for a long while until finally the quiet between them broke. "What you did out there," he said, his tone stripped of earlier condescension, "wasn't just support. You altered the whole fight before it began." Elena glanced up, not defensive, not prideful. "Your people brought the hostages home. I only kept the doors open." Brooks leaned in, unable to restrain himself. 8 kills from a moving platform in under 3 minutes? That's not just keeping doors open, Lieutenant. That's rewriting the manual. Kane exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've trained my whole career to survive valley traps like that. You cleared it like you'd rehearsed it 100 times." Elena didn't correct them. She only checked the rifle's safety once more, her movements precise, as if ritual mattered as much now as in the fight. Commander Hayes, strapped in near the cockpit, turned her head just enough to look down the line of soldiers. Her eyes found Elena. "Mission success percentage before we launched was 30% at best. You turned those odds upside down. That's not luck. That's capability." No one disagreed. For men who had built careers on skepticism, silence was its own form of respect. The helicopters touched down at San Diego under the dim glow of runway lights. The rescued civilians were quickly shepherded toward medical tents, their relief audible in broken sobs and whispered thank yous. Operators filed toward the debriefing hall, body armor creaking, boots heavy with exhaustion. Elena disembarked with them, her rifle case slung casually but her expression unreadable. Inside the debrief, the atmosphere was electric. Screens lit the room with satellite images of the valley compound, now marked with icons representing cleared sniper hides, Analysts clicked through footage, presenting overlays that traced every round she had fired. The precision was undeniable. Commander Hayes stood before the gathered personnel, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led missions most people never heard about. Lieutenant Navarro's performance enabled this team to execute flawlessly. 12 civilians returned alive, hostile command structure dismantled, enemy sniper coverage eradicated. This operation will be studied for years to come. The room filled with restrained applause, not the polite clapping of ceremony, but the raw acknowledgement of professionals who had seen something extraordinary. Patterson rose slowly, his broad frame casting a long shadow. He had been the loudest skeptic on the range. Now he was the first to stand. "Sullivan," he began, then caught himself shaking his head. "Navarro, what you brought tonight isn't a trick or a fluke. You've proven that precision at distance isn't just theory. It's survival. You changed the way we think about Overwatch." Kane stepped forward, adding his voice. "Ma'am, I'd like to ask, could you train our teams in your methods? Not just the shot placement, the way you read the wind, the terrain. None of us saw what you saw." All eyes turned to her. Elena shifted slightly, the spotlight of expectation pressing down. She spoke with the same measured tone she had carried since her arrival. "Every unit has its specialty. Rangers are taught to read the environment as part of survival. You fight close, I fight far. Together, missions succeed. I'll share what I can, but what you witnessed wasn't magic. It was discipline built under pressure." Brooks nodded, almost reverently. "Discipline we could all use." Patterson walked to the range board mounted in the hall, the one that listed achievements across decades of competition. His hand hovered briefly before he picked up the marker. With slow, deliberate strokes, he wrote beneath his own entry, "Record," equaled by Lieutenant Elena Navarro, 75th Rangers. Then he added another line, "Combat performance exceeded expectation." The hall grew quiet again, the weight of that acknowledgement settling over everyone. Elena, who had walked onto their range as an outsider, now had her name etched into their legacy. Yet she wasn't finished. She turned toward Patterson, voice low but steady. "Chief, before I leave, there's something else I'd like to attempt." Brows furrowed. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What exactly?" Elena gestured toward the range visible through the glass beyond the hall. "There's an experimental marker set at 1500, beyond what's been logged. I want to try." A murmur swept the room. 1500 meters was beyond doctrine, beyond comfort. Patterson frowned, concern flickering across his face. "That's past the limits of this facility." The optics barely hold clarity at that distance. "Limits," Elena replied softly, "exist until someone moves them." The statement hung heavy, electrifying the atmosphere. Operators exchanged glances, some skeptical, others exhilarated by the audacity. Hayes considered her, then gave a short nod. "You've earned the shot. If you want it, take it." The hall emptied toward the firing line, anticipation buzzing like static in the air. Men who had once dismissed her as a tourist now crowded behind, eager to witness what might be the moment their range's story turned a final page. Elena laid her rifle across the bench, the same calmness in her posture as always. Yet the distance this time was greater, the challenge monumental. Patterson stood at her shoulder, no longer doubting, only watching. As she settled behind the scope, the weight of the crowd pressed in, not hostile anymore, but expectant. The range fell into that familiar silence again, the hush that comes before something impossible either collapses or becomes legend. The benches along the firing line gleamed under floodlights, throwing hard shadows across the concrete. Operators crowded in behind the red stripe, every one of them leaning forward, as if proximity might make the bullet fly straighter. A new stillness settled over the range, not the casual quiet of routine, practice, but the heavy pause of history about to be tested. Elena Navarro stretched prone across the bench, body aligned with the rifle as though welded into position. Her cheek touched the comb, the stock molded against her shoulder. The Barrett lay before her like an anchor, its long barrel pointing toward a speck so distant it looked unreal. The 1,500-meter marker barely registered as more than a pinprick against the barren earth. She took her time, not to build suspense but to respect the shot. Wind flags fluttered in irregular rhythm. Mirage shimmered along the valley floor. Even the hum of the air conditioning units on the far wall seemed louder tonight. She adjusted for each detail with methodical precision, 2 clicks here, a fractional shift there, then a subtle lift of the barrel to counter the unseen slope of ground between her and the target. Behind her, voices whispered. Brooks muttered to Kane, "If she nails this, it changes the ceiling for every one of us." Kane only shook his head, eyes never leaving the scope. Patterson stood close, arms folded, but no longer defensive. His silence was a shield, his focus absolute. Elena breathed deeply, the rhythm slow and deliberate. She counted the seconds between gusts, waited for the brief lull she'd predicted, and pressed the trigger. The Barrett roared, the muzzle brake kicked up a violent blast of dust and grit, the sound echoing off concrete walls. For half a heartbeat, nothing registered. Then, at the extreme edge of visibility, the experimental target erupted in a plume of shattered earth and metal fragments. The spotter's voice cracked the silence, loud and almost disbelieving. Impact, dead center. Confirmed at 1,500, the range exploded, not with cheers at first, but with stunned disbelief. Men who had once scoffed now stared, wide-eyed, as though they'd witnessed a trick of light. Brooks exhaled sharply, a laugh caught in his throat. Kane muttered something under his breath that no one heard. Patterson's expression shifted slowly. The disbelief faded, replaced by something heavier, respect bordering on reverence. He stepped forward, placed one hand on the bench, and leaned in. "Navarro," he said quietly, "you just pushed this facility beyond its own blueprint." Elena opened the bolt, cleared the chamber, and set the rifle down. Her face remained calm, but a flicker of satisfaction glinted in her eyes. She looked at Patterson, then at the board where names and distances had defined pride for years. "Records are milestones," she said softly. "They're meant to be passed." The men behind her erupted into applause, not the forced clapping of a ceremony, but raw acknowledgement. Even the younger operator, who had mocked her at first, found himself clapping, albeit hesitantly, as though confessing his earlier arrogance. Hayes arrived in time to witness the aftermath, her boots clicking on the concrete. She glanced at the smoking barrel, then at the faces around her. "I take it we just witnessed history," Coleman answered for the group, his voice carrying weight. "Ma'am, she just turned impossible into procedure." Hayes allowed the faintest smile. "Then the curriculum changes starting tomorrow." Operators surged around Elena, not crowding her, but hungry to learn. Questions came in bursts. How she read the mirage, why she adjusted the way she did, how she kept her body stable under the helicopter's shake earlier and the recoil now. Elena answered patiently, her tone never boastful, always instructional. She explained how to divide wind into zones, how to trust mirage closer to the ground more than the higher flags, how to treat every surface as part of the ballistic equation. It wasn't a lecture, it was a revelation. Hours later, when the crowd had dispersed and the range grew quiet again, Patterson remained. He stood by the board, marker in hand. He wrote in firm strokes beneath the last entry, "Record surpassed, Lieutenant Elena Navarro, 75th Rangers, 1,500 meters." He capped the marker and turned to her. "We'll build a new lane beyond this, for you and for whoever tries next. That's the way forward." Elena regarded him steadily. "It's not about me. It's about making sure the next person doesn't stop at 1,200 because they think it's the ceiling." For the first time, Patterson extended his hand. She accepted it without hesitation. The shake wasn't ceremony. It was acknowledgement between professionals who now spoke the same language. 6 months later, the range bore little resemblance to the one Elena had first walked onto. New markers dotted the valley, extending beyond the old limits. Training manuals had been revised, and operators studied her methods as part of their standard drills. What began as a record attempt had grown into a doctrine. Navarro's name was spoken not just in San Diego but across multiple units. Reports filtered back from operations overseas, sniper teams applying her. Calculations to neutralize threats that would have cost lives before. Rescue missions that once carried heavy casualty estimates were completed clean. Inside briefing halls, commanders referenced the Navarro method when planning assaults that required eliminating Overwatch. It had become shorthand for precision under pressure, a blend of instinct and mathematics that could turn hopeless terrain into safe passage. For Elena, the recognition mattered less than the outcomes. She watched teams she'd never trained directly carry her techniques into battles she would never see. Every after-action report noting survivors instead of fatalities reaffirmed why she had pushed the boundary. Back at San Diego, Patterson walked the range one evening, watching a group of younger operators attempt the 1,500-meter shot. None hit center that day, but each came closer than any SEAL had before Navarro arrived. He found her observing from the sidelines, arms folded. "They're chasing you," he said. She shook her head. "They're chasing the target. That's the way it should be." Brooks approached with a grin. "Chief, you should have seen it yesterday." One of the new guys read the wind shift like she taught him. First time he's ever landed inside a foot at that distance. Patterson allowed himself a rare smile. "Progress. That's what this place is supposed to mean." The sun dipped low, throwing the range into golden light. Elena watched the operators line up again, each adjusting their scopes, each calculating the unseen. They weren't trying to be her. They were trying to be better than yesterday. That, she thought, was the true record. The woman once dismissed as a lost visitor had not only rewritten the board, she had reshaped an entire culture. And the ripple of her influence stretched far beyond the valley, where a target once stood untouched for a decade. In every shot taken with confidence, in every mission concluded without loss, in every operator who dared push past the old ceiling, her presence lived on. And as the echo of another Barrett round thundered downrange, Elena Navarro knew that sometimes the most enduring victories weren't the ones etched on a board, but the ones carried silently in the lives saved because someone had proven what was possible. Morning heat rose off the concrete in soft veils, turning the distant markers into a pale mirage that trembled above the berm. The new lane stretched farther than any old-timer would have believed on her first day. Here, a dotted procession of steel and painted plates, stepping out past the old ceiling. Fresh paint on the safety stripe had hardly dried. On the far wall, the board held a new bottom line in thick ink, "Record surpassed. Lieutenant Elena Navarro, 75th Rangers, 1,500 meters. They'd asked her to come back to teach, not to lecture, to show. Patterson met her at the gate with a nod that said the relationship had changed. No ceremony, no long speech. He just walked alongside her in the hum of early compressors and distant fans, the way a ship's captain might stroll the pier with the pilot who'd taken him through reefs that don't forgive. "Got a full section," he said, chin tipping toward the assembly. "Young, hungry, you'll like them." "They'll make me earn it," Elena answered. That too. Operators clustered behind the red line. Faces she hadn't seen before mixed with a few familiar ones. Kane and Brooks stood off to the side like proud older brothers giving room, Coleman with his notebook half out of his pocket, as though he might pretend he wasn't going to write anything and then fill a page anyway. Near the end of the row was the young man who'd laughed the first day she appeared. He wasn't laughing now. He wore the look of someone who had replayed his words too many nights and wanted a chance to replace them with better ones. Elena set the Barrett on bench 8 and didn't touch it. "Today isn't about the rifle," she said, voice even. "It's about everything between this muzzle and that plate." She crouched at the edge of the concrete and dragged a line with a piece of chalk. One short segment near the bench, a longer one in the middle, a third near the berm, near air, mid-corridor, far gate, she narrated, tapping each mark. "The lie will usually live in the middle. Don't let the far flag trick you into chasing it. If you can't see what the wind is doing at the ground, you're guessing." She stood, brushed chalk from her fingers, and pointed to the shimmering light just above the field. "Mirage at knee height is honest. Mirage high can be dramatic and useless. Trust the lower truth." Brooks smirked, impressed. "Lower truth. I like that." "Don't like it," Elena said. "Measure it." A ripple of laughter, then quiet again. She walked the line, stopping to sight with an empty ring of her hand, adjusting the angle of one bipod foot, sliding a rear bag a half-inch, tilting a scope sunshade a fraction. Each small change said the same thing in a different language. Control what you can, neutralize what you must, ignore what doesn't matter. Patterson lifted his voice. "Navarro's going to demonstrate at distance. Afterward, one of you will replicate the process with her coaching. Nobody leaves with a ghost story. You leave with steps." He let that settle, then added, softer, "And you leave with the pressure of doing it when it counts." Elena took the rifle into her shoulder as if it belonged there and always had. The shot she'd taken 6 months ago had already been folded into legend and training slides and whispered comparisons. She had no interest in replaying it like a favorite song. The point was to drag the line forward for someone else. "Hold your questions for 3 minutes," she said. "Just watch." She didn't build suspense. She built a sight picture. 2 clicks for bench roll she could feel in her bones, 3/4 of a mil to respect. The river of air across the far third, a whisper left to cancel the optimistic mid-flag. Breath like a metronome. The trigger moved, the world did not. Sound slammed the wall and came back thinner. A moment later, the plate at distance rocked so slowly it looked like it was remembering something from a dream. The spotter called it clear, professional, center left, within a palm. Elena lifted her cheek from the stock. "Not perfect," she said, unbothered. "Perfect is a stall. I'd rather teach you how to correct than pretend you'll live in a laboratory." She ran the bolt, adjusted a hair, center second. The plate jerked dead middle. The cheer that went up was brief. Patterson cut it off with a look, not unkind, just practical. This wasn't a pep rally, it was a class. "Who's first?" Elena asked. The young operator at the end took a step forward. "I'd like to try," he said, words steady and louder than they needed to be, the way honesty sometimes comes out when someone is determined not to dress it up. Elena met his gaze. No scolding, no rescue. "Good," she said. "Name?" "Price," he answered, almost relieved to be held to the same rule as anyone else. "Price, you'll narrate everything you think you see," she said. "We'll listen and decide if you're seeing or hoping." He swallowed, then lay behind the rifle. His shoulders were tight. She tapped his elbow and the tension dropped a few degrees. He looked through the glass, then down at the chalk lines, then back. "Low mirage slow," he said. "Mid looks busier than it is. Far, right to left, not strong. How much?" "3/4 at the plate," he ventured, cautious. Elena didn't give him the answer. "Call the near," she prompted. "Quarter left." "And bench? Pushes me high right if I let it." She nodded once. "Holds," he called them, tentative, then firmer when she didn't contradict him. The trigger broke. The plate wobbled. Dust at the base told a harder truth. "Right." "Low," the spotter announced. Price went red and lifted his head as if he'd been caught stealing. "Stay in the glass," Elena said quietly. "Don't hide from your miss. It's the only teacher that shows up every time." He settled again, breathing through embarrassment. "Correction?" she asked. "What did the ground say?" "Mid lied," he admitted. "Near was weaker than I gave it credit for." "Fix it." He did. The second shot walked inward. The third found metal, not center, but honest enough to earn a few claps before Patterson's look flattened them again. Elena let her hand rest on the stock, but didn't take it. "You'll have days your first round is perfect," she told Price. "You'll have nights it isn't. In the field, you get one chance. Here, you get reps. Use them like they're the last ones you'll ever get." He rolled to his side and looked up at her. "I was wrong," he said, the apology naked. "You were early," she replied. "That's a fixable condition." They ran 2 more students through the same ritual. One read too much into a flashy flag and learned the quiet value of low mirage. Another fought the bench, tried to muscle recoil, and felt the shot wander. Elena put a sand sock under his hand and showed him how to let the stock come back without dragging the crosshairs into a new zip code. Between drills, Patterson leaned closer. "You sure you don't want to come here full time?" he asked under his breath, half joking, half hopeful. "Range Master Navarro has a ring to it." "I don't want a ring," she said. "I want whoever stands here after me to stop staring at 1200 like it's Everest." "You've done that," he said. "Then I'll keep doing it until I'm not needed." A runner in base utilities trotted up with a tablet. "Message for Lieutenant Navarro," he said, extending it with the unself-conscious respect of someone who knows he's interrupting something he'll tell his kids about someday. The screen showed a short note, clipped from an email and forwarded through channels that normally carry weightier things. It was from a relief coordinator, one of the 12 Elena had never spoken to since that night. "We teach in clinics up country now," the note read. "They hear the hum of rotors and don't duck anymore. I thought you'd want to know what you did keeps working." Elena read it twice and handed the tablet back. Her face didn't change, but something in her shoulders loosened as if the range air had shifted. Kane drifted over during a break. "Got reports from a unit we partner with," he said. "Used your wind zoning on a ridge in the Balkans last week." The lieutenant wrote Navarro Lanes on his map. "Thought you'd appreciate the graffiti." Coleman finally pulled his notebook fully into the open. "What's the one line you'd print on a card and force into every chest pocket?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Align what you control, absorb what you can't, don't waste heartbeats chasing mirage you don't need." He underlined it twice. The afternoon slid into a late light that turned the valley gold. Patterson called a break and sent most of the group to hydrate. Elena stayed prone, not to show off, but to settle the idea that a hard thing can be made into a repeatable thing. Price lingered near her bench until he found nerve enough to speak. "Could I run it once more? Not for the board, for the feeling of doing it right." "Of course," she said. He built his position slower, less eager to defeat the distance and more interested in understanding it. He narrated in a quiet voice, more for himself than for her. When he sent, the plate bounced near center. He didn't cheer. He watched the wobble and the way dust kicked and built a mental sketch he would draw again later from memory. "Better," Elena said. "Truer," he corrected himself, and she let the words stand. Patterson stepped to the board with his marker and added a small line beneath the legend "She." "Deed set, training standard updated, 1,500 authorized for instruction." He capped the pen and faced the class. "We won't turn this into carnival shooting," he said, "but you'll know it's there. You'll know why it matters, and you'll know when not to chase it." A siren coughed twice and died. Just a drill, no one moved fast. Habit made all heads turn anyway. Then life resumed at the pace of instruction and sweat and patience. As the session wound down, Hayes arrived, hair still damp from the pool. She swam. When others ran, not because she liked it, but because hard jobs demand lungs. She took in the scene quickly, the chalk lines, the scuffed bipod feet, the students with sunburnt necks and full notebooks. "So this is where the new gospel gets written," she said. Elena shrugged. "No gospel, just steps." Hayes's mouth ticked. "Steps that change how we move under fire. I can live with that." They walked the line together, pausing to correct a shoulder angle, to praise a clean trigger prep, to replace a sunshade someone had left in the wrong pocket. It was not glamorous. It was better. Near the end of the day, Patterson made a small ceremony of nothing. He unscrewed a brass plate from the side of a bench. Bench 6, the one, where skepticism had been replaced by data, and turned it in his hands. "We used to joke this bench had a spirit," he said. "Turned out it just needed a pilot." He handed the plate to Elena. "Take it," he said, "not as a trophy, as a reminder that places are only what people do in them." She weighed the metal, thumb tracing the scratches that came from a decade of elbows and bags and bad days. "I'll put it somewhere nobody sees," she said, "and know when it's time to hand it to somebody else." Dusk eased in. Floodlights hummed to life. The range wore its evening face. Harsher shadows, clearer air, the kind of visual honesty shooters like until they realize wind doesn't care what time it is. The class packed gear, laughter creeping back in now that the work was done without dulling the sharper edges of what they'd learned. Price hovered one last time, then squared himself. "Ma'am," he said, the word stripped of defensiveness. "Thank you." "For the shot?" she asked. "For letting me be better than I was yesterday." She nodded once. "That's the whole assignment." He left with the others, and the concrete quieted. Elena stayed, cheek to stock, not to fire, but to look through glass at a plate she had turned from myth into training aid. The silence wasn't sacred, it was earned. Patterson found her there and didn't interrupt until she lifted her head. "There's talk upstairs about a cross-branch exchange," he said. "Rangers here, SEALs to your side of the house. You could take point." "Good," she said. "Make it normal to share what saves us." He shoved his hands in his pockets and looked out over the valley that no longer ended where it used to. "When you walked in, I was sure I knew the story I was in," he admitted. "Today, I'm glad I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Elena said, standing. "You were at a chapter break." He laughed, short and genuine, and they started toward the gate in the long shadow of the berm. At the door, an enlisted kid jogged up with a padded envelope and a grin he couldn't keep off his face. "This came for you," he said to Elena, then bobbed his head at Patterson because that's what you do when you hand something to a legend in front of a legend. Inside was a photograph. 12 civilians in dusty medical scrubs and borrowed jackets standing on a clinic porch in morning sun. On the back, a scrawl, "You didn't just take us home, you took away the eyes that used to keep help away. Come visit when you can. The coffee is terrible, the smiles aren't." Elena tucked the picture into her pack. "Some keepsakes deserve pockets, not frames." They stepped into the evening. The base sounded different at this hour. Fewer engines, more conversation, the civilized clank of trays in the mess hall, the distant crack of a side range where someone was working through a problem without witnesses. Hayes peeled away to take a call. Kane and Brooks argued cheerfully about a wind call from 20 minutes earlier, like it was a game worth winning. Coleman finally put his notebook away. At the threshold, Patterson slowed. "When the next stranger walks onto my line," he said, "I'll remember this day before I tell him he's in the wrong place." Elena looked back at the floodlit benches and the chalk dust still caught in the seams. "When the next stranger asks for a chance," she said, "remind him he has to carry it, not you." He nodded. "Fair." She started toward the parking lot, the weight of the brass plate in her bag offset by the lightness that comes from seeing a place change in front of your eyes. The air smelled like oil and hot concrete and cut grass from somewhere beyond the fence. It smelled like work. She liked that. As she reached the curb, Price called her name. He jogged up, breathless and grinning despite himself. "Chief said I could ask one thing," he said. "If you had to write one sentence at the top of every range card from now on, what would it be?" Elena thought for half a breath. Sometimes the limit is just where everyone stopped trying. He repeated it under his breath like something he meant to keep. She climbed into the truck that had waited in the same spot the day she first shouldered a rifle on this concrete. In the rear view, the range sat framed in glass, floodlights washing the lanes, flags still, whispering their small truths, plates farther out than anyone had believed belonged here. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. What mattered was already moving without her. When she drove away, the sound that followed wasn't applause or sirens. It was the unremarkable music of a place doing what it exists to do, a bolt cycling, a breath, caught and released, a teacher stepping back so a student can see the target himself. Across a country and an ocean, a team in a different valley would feel a little less naked because a young lieutenant had written Navarro lanes across a map. Somewhere else, a relief worker would keep a clinic door open after dark because no one scanned the ridge with bad intentions anymore. And here on a square of concrete in San Diego, a group of new shooters would argue about whether Mirage at shin level or Flag at shoulder height had lied louder today. The board would keep its names. The plates would keep their scars. People would come and go, but the real record, the one no marker could hold, would travel with them, stitched into their habits, spoken in their corrections, alive in their restraint. Not a single shot fired for the board. All of them fired for the window of time a family needs to see a loved one step off a plane. The outsider they'd misjudged had become the measure they used to judge their own work. Not a pedestal, a process. Not a myth, a method. And long after the chalk washed away and the brass cooled, the lessons stayed. Simple enough to teach to anyone who could listen. See the wind, trust the ground, move the line. That was how Elena Ghost Navarro left a place without leaving it at all. On VeteranBiker, we ride through stories that remind us how grit and precision change everything. Elena Navarro walked onto a range as a stranger and left as the standard by which others measure themselves. Her lesson wasn't about records. It was about refusing to accept limits when lives depend on it. If this story moved you, let us know what part struck deepest in the comments. Subscribe and stay with us, because more tales of quiet courage are already on the road. Thank you for watching Veteran Biker, and we'll see you in the next story.